Next, we will be continuing the conversation on internal monitoring and reporting. When conducting internal verification, you can ask yourself several questions to ensure your footprint is meeting the 5 GHG protocol principles. On the slide here, you can see that we've outlined some examples of the key considerations that can help you identify potential problem areas in your footprint. So, for example, you'll want to consider whether there are any gaps and if those are sufficiently addressed, if the said data makes sense, and check that your activity data and emission factor units match. These questions, and others like them, will help you internally verify your final footprint. Next, let's discuss how to ensure your methodologies are properly documented. This step is crucial because when you go to repeat your footprinting process in a year, it can be hard to remember the steps you followed or where the information originated from. Adding a methodology tab to your footprint outlining exactly how you calculated each piece will be helpful not only for people who are viewing it and who are unfamiliar with the calculation process, but also for retention of knowledge around the process in general for those who were participating in the calculation process. In addition, it will be useful as it can be directly incorporated into external reporting. Methodology tab will also be the foundation for a GHG monitoring protocol. This is a best practice as it helps document all the information needed to externally report on your Scope 3 emissions and provide a central place for all relevant information related to your Scope 3 footprint. To create your monitoring protocol, you need to define your organizational boundaries and operational boundaries, scope, base year, and reporting timeframe. Document how you collected activity data for emission calculations and any uncertainties you encountered. Document sources for emission factors and a detailed approach for calculating the Scope 3 emissions for each category. And lastly, determine the cadence for which you plan to update your footprint, for example, annually. To further inform your monitoring protocol, it's good to reference the GHG accounting and reporting standards for best practices on developing and maintaining this document. The benefits of creating a monitoring protocol are that it creates a living document to capture all footprinting information, allows for improvement of data collection procedures, and it allows for calculation and methodology improvements over time. Next, we'll take a look at an example of how to set up your monitoring protocol. So here's an example on how you might lay out your methodology for calculating emissions in 2 categories. A general framework you can follow is to include the description of the emissions creating activity, the methodology used to calculate the emissions, the type of activity data, the emission factors used, and the calculations. So, for example, looking at category 5 on the left-hand side of the screen, this is for waste generated in operations. In this example, we wrote down a description of what is included in this category, which in this case is the emissions from the treatment and disposal of waste generated for this business. Then we documented the methodology we used. For this category, emissions were calculated based on the quantity of waste generated, broken down by building, facility, and region. We then wrote down where we got the activity data and our emission factors from, and finally, we showed the way we calculated the emissions at the bottom. You'll want to repeat this for every single category, and even for those that you did not calculate, you'll want to provide some documentation explaining why you did not calculate that portion and justifying it. So that'll be all for this section. In your next section, you will be reviewing more on external footprint verification and reporting.